His name was Procopius. He was a lawyer, a soldier's aide, a man who had seen the siege walls of Carthage and the burning harbor of Naples. He had watched armies march and emperors rage. He was not a man who frightened easily. But in the spring of 541 AD, Procopius sat in Constantinople and wrote something that even he could barely believe. He described bodies piling in the streets faster than the living could carry them. He described gravediggers who went to work in the morning and never came home. He described a city of 500,000 people going silent, not from curfew, not from war, but from something no one could see, name, or stop. He wrote, "There was a kind of dark lump rising under the armpits and in the groin. Then fever, then death, sometimes within hours." You are standing in that city right now. The harbor smells of brine and something else, something sweet and wrong. The man who sold you bread yesterday is not at his stall. The woman who drew water from the cistern this morning is lying in the alley beside it. The emperor himself has fallen ill, and no one knows if he will rise. This is not the Black Death of 1347 that you read about in school. This is older, deadlier in proportion to the world it struck. And history, for reasons we will get to, almost buried it entirely. 50 million people gone, and most people today cannot name it. Let's fix that. To understand what the plague of Justinian destroyed, you have to understand what it interrupted. The year is 527 AD. A man named Justinian I has just become emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, the half of Rome that did not fall in 476. He rules from Constantinople, a city of roughly 500,000 people, one of the largest urban centers on Earth at this moment in history. The streets are paved. The aqueducts run clean water. The Hagia Sophia is under construction, a dome so vast that when it is finished, the engineers themselves will not fully understand why it stays up. Justinian has a plan, and it is not a small one. He wants to reconquer the Western Roman Empire. All of it. Spain, North Africa, Italy, Gaul. He wants to reunite the Roman world under one law, one faith, one throne. His general, Belisarius, a man of almost supernatural battlefield competence, has already taken back North Africa from the Vandals by 534 AD. By 540 AD, Belisarius walks into Ravenna, the capital of the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, and the Gothic king surrenders personally. Rome is Roman again. This is the high water mark. This is the moment when Justinian's dream appears, genuinely, to be working. You are living in that empire. You pay taxes in gold coins, stamped with Justinian's face. You trade grain from Egypt, silk from Persia, olive oil from Tunisia. The Eastern Mediterranean is one integrated economy, a web of ports and roads and seasonal shipping routes that moves food, goods, and people on a scale the ancient world has not seen since the height of Augustus. That network, that beautiful, efficient, interconnected network, is about to become the plague's highway. The Romans called Egypt the breadbasket of the empire. Grain ships from Alexandria crossed the Mediterranean constantly, carrying millions of bushels annually to feed Constantinople and the armies. Those same ships carried rats. And on those rats, living in the fur and feeding on blood, rode fleas carrying Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. The first confirmed outbreak appears in the port city of Pelusium, on the northeastern edge of Egypt's Nile Delta, in 541 AD. From there, it follows the grain ships exactly. Alexandria, then the North African coast, then Sicily, then Constantinople itself. Justinian's trade network, his greatest achievement, is the mechanism of his own catastrophe. What do you think about how a civilization's greatest strength can become its fatal weakness? Drop a comment below. I'm genuinely curious whether this reminds you of anything in the modern world. The ships have already left port. There is no stopping them now. Constantinople, in the summer of 541 AD, is a city of approximately 500,000 people. Within 18 months, historians estimate it loses somewhere between 40 and 50% of its population. Do the arithmetic. That is 250,000 people in one city in less than 2 years. You wake up one morning and your neighbor is not coughing. He's not feverish. He seems fine. Then he's not fine. Then, sometimes within 24 hours, he is dead. The bubonic form of the plague, the most common, begins with a flea bite you probably did not notice. Within 2 to 6 days, the bacteria reach your lymph nodes. The nodes swell into hard, painful lumps called buboes, typically in the groin, armpit, or neck, some growing to the size of an apple. The fever climbs, hallucinations begin. Procopius records patients seeing spectral forms, phantoms, he says, of a demonic shape pressing down on their chests at night. He was describing the delirium of septicemic shock. But in 541 AD, you do not know that word. You know only that something invisible is pressing people into the ground. The Emperor Justinian contracts the plague himself in 542 AD and survives, which is statistically remarkable and probably infuriating to the 50,000 people who did not. His Empress Theodora manages the government in his absence. This is a fact most textbooks skip. A woman is effectively running the Roman Empire during its worst crisis in 2 centuries, and she does it without the city collapsing. The logistical breakdown, however, is total. The bodies accumulate faster than burial crews can manage. Justinian eventually orders soldiers to carry the dead outside the walls in boats and stack them in towers along the shores of the Bosphorus. When even that proves insufficient, the bodies are lowered into the towers of the city's own fortifications, packed in, and the towers sealed. The city smells. Even from the harbor, ships give Constantinople a wide berth. The grain supply from Egypt, already disrupted by the outbreak there, falters. Justinian releases funds directly from the imperial treasury to pay gravediggers at premium wages because no one will do the job voluntarily. The city's bread dole, the free grain distribution that had been running continuously since the time of Augustus, begins to fail. Bakers are dead. Millers are dead. The men who ran the docks are dead. You are trying to find food in a city where the normal economy has simply stopped functioning. The market stalls are empty, not because of a siege, but because the vendors are gone. The distribution system, centuries old and robust enough to survive wars and earthquakes, cannot survive this. And Constantinople is not the worst affected place. It is merely the one with a historian paying attention. Here is what everyone assumes about medieval plague. It was fast, it was total, and then it was over. Wrong. Completely wrong. And the difference matters enormously. The plague of Justinian does not arrive once. It arrives, retreats, and comes back, repeatedly, for 200 years. This is the part of the story that most popular history simply does not tell. The initial outbreak of 541 to 544 AD is the first wave. It is devastating. But beginning around 558 AD, the plague returns. Then again around 573 AD, then 586 AD, then 599 AD. Historians have identified at least 18 to 25 distinct recurrence waves between 541 AD and approximately 750 AD, when the pandemic finally fades. Think about what that means for the people living through it. You are not enduring one catastrophe. You are enduring a catastrophe that comes back every decade or so. Just as you have rebuilt, just as the fields are producing again, just as your children are growing up. Then the dark lumps appear in someone's armpit again, and you watch the whole process start over. The psychological weight of this is almost impossible to calculate. Procopius writes with a kind of stunned flatness in his later accounts, the prose of a man who has run out of the emotional vocabulary to describe horror. He simply records numbers, names, streets. He stops using metaphor entirely. Some scholars read this as exhaustion. I read it as a man who has learned that metaphor makes things seem survivable. Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible, survives in rodent reservoirs, meaning rat and rodent populations in the wild that carry the disease without dying from it. This is why the plague can disappear for a decade and return. The bacterium has not gone anywhere. It is waiting in the rodent population of Central Asia and the Near East, cycling through flea vectors, occasionally crossing into human populations when trade, war, or famine brings enough rats and humans into close contact. The Roman Empire's extensive grain storage facilities are, effectively, permanent rodent hotels. The military camps, with their enormous stores of food, are plague incubators on wheels. You are a soldier on the Persian frontier in 573 AD. Your unit has been fighting the Sassanid Persians for 3 years. You are exhausted and underpaid, and the man to your left has just developed a swelling under his arm. You know exactly what that means. Does the idea of a plague that keeps returning for 2 centuries change how you think about resilience versus collapse? Tell me in the comments. This is the kind of detail historians argue about constantly. But the recurring plague is only half the damage. The other half is what it does to the people who survive. Let us talk about what the plague of Justinian actually killed, beyond the bodies. By 542 AD, Justinian's campaign to reunite the Roman Empire is functionally over. Not because Belisarius loses a battle, not because the Persians outmaneuver Rome diplomatically, but because the army simply does not have enough men to hold what it has taken. Italy, reconquered by 540 AD at enormous cost in money and lives, begins to slip away almost immediately. The Lombards, a Germanic people from the Danube region, invade northern Italy in 568 AD. They are not stopped. There are not enough soldiers. The plague has killed somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the military-age male population of the Eastern Mediterranean over 2 decades of recurring outbreaks. You cannot recruit replacements fast enough because the villages those recruits come from are also depleted. Historians estimate the total population loss of the Roman Empire between 541 and 700 AD at somewhere between 25 and 50%. For a pre-modern economy built entirely on agricultural labor, that is not a recession. That is a structural collapse. Tax revenue falls because the people who paid taxes are dead. Agricultural output falls because the people who farmed the land are dead. The army contracts because the men who filled its ranks are dead, and also because there is not enough tax revenue to pay the ones who survive. Justinian's legal codification, the Corpus Juris Civilis, his most lasting achievement, which forms the foundation of most European legal systems today, continues because it is a document, and documents do not die of plague. But the administrative apparatus meant to implement it, the governors, the lawyers, the civil servants, is hollowing out. The currency is debased. The gold content of the solidus, the standard Roman coin that had held its value for 2 centuries, begins to fluctuate in ways that indicate fiscal stress.
Justinian spends his final years not reconquering Spain or Gaul, but trying to stabilize an empire that is slowly losing mass in all directions. He dies in 565 AD. He is 82 or 83 years old. He dies still believing, apparently, that the reconquest can be continued by his successors. It cannot. His nephew, Justin II, inherits an empire that is broke, shrinking, and fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. The Persians in the east, the Lombards in Italy, and various pressures along the Danube. Justin II reportedly goes insane under the pressure. His court has him wheeled around the palace on a cart in his final years, raving. History does not record whether anyone told him about the plague's role in all of this. Probably not. Probably they blamed the generals. But here is the thing that historians have only recently begun to fully appreciate. The plague's most important consequence is not what it does to Rome.
In the 1990s and early 2000s, historians began using a framework called the Plague of Justinian as world historical pivot. It is not a catchy name, but the idea is important. The argument goes like this. The Plague of Justinian does not merely weaken the Roman Empire. It reshapes the entire geopolitical structure of the Old World in ways that are still visible today. Consider the Arabian Peninsula in the late 6th century. The great powers of the ancient world, Rome and Sassanid Persia, have been fighting a series of devastating wars since roughly 526 AD. Both empires are also being hammered by recurring plague. The Arab tribal populations, by contrast, are largely pastoral and dispersed. Their population density is low enough that the plague, which requires sufficient contact rates to spread efficiently, does not devastate them the way it devastates the dense urban populations of Rome and Persia. By the time Muhammad begins preaching in Mecca around 610 AD, and especially by the time the Islamic armies begin expanding militarily after 632 AD, both Rome and Persia are, demographically and financially, exhausted. The Eastern Roman Empire loses Egypt, its primary grain and tax revenue source, to Islamic conquest in 641 AD. It loses Syria and Palestine. It loses North Africa over the following decades. These are not marginal territories. Egypt alone had been providing approximately 1/3 of Constantinople's grain supply for centuries. Losing it is not a wound the empire recovers from. The Eastern Roman Empire survives, shrunken, for another 8 centuries as what we now call the Byzantine Empire. But the grand Mediterranean Roman world that Justinian tried to reconstruct is gone. And it is gone, in significant part, because 50 million people died of a disease transmitted by fleas on rats on grain ships. You are living in that aftermath.
You do not know the name Yersinia pestis. You do not know what a flea vector is. You know only that God is angry, or the stars are wrong, or that Rome's sins have finally caught up with it. You find theological explanations because theological explanations are the only framework available to you. John of Ephesus, a bishop and historian who lived through multiple plague waves, writes that the world is entering its final age. He is not being melodramatic. From where he stands, the evidence is genuinely compelling. Here is what I want you to sit with. The Islamic world, medieval Europe, and the Byzantine successor state that called itself Rome for 1,000 more years. All 3 of these civilizations are shaped in their formative periods by a power vacuum created in part by this plague. What do you think that tells us about how catastrophes function as historical turning points? I would genuinely love to read your thoughts in the comments. The plague also accelerates one of the most significant cultural and intellectual shifts in Western history: the consolidation of Christian monastic communities as the primary centers of learning, medicine, and record-keeping. When secular administrative structures collapse, the church fills the vacuum. This is not entirely good and not entirely bad. It is complicated, the way history always is when you look closely enough. Justinian's empire needed tax revenue to function. The plague killed the taxpayers. The math was always going to be fatal. There is one more thing you need to know about what the plague left behind that we can still find today.
Go back to Procopius. Go back to that lawyer sitting in Constantinople in 541 AD, watching the bodies pile up outside his window, trying to find words for something that had no precedent in his vocabulary. He does not know he is witnessing a pivot. He does not know that the civilization he is documenting is in the process of being replaced by three others that do not yet exist. He does not know that the flea on the rat in the grain ship from Alexandria has just changed the direction of human history. He knows only that the man who sold him bread yesterday is not at his stall. That smallness is the thing history books miss when they reduce the plague of Justinian to a percentage or a footnote. Every one of those 50 million people is a baker, a soldier, a mother arguing with her landlord, a child learning to read. Every single one of them is a world that closes. We remember the Black Death because it happened closer to our printing presses and left more documents.
We remember it because the art and literature it spawned is still hanging on museum walls. The plague of Justinian killed more people proportionally, reshaped more of the world structurally, and disappeared from popular memory almost entirely. If that troubles you, good. It should. There is a genetic signature of Yersinia pestis from the Justinianic strain that researchers have recovered from burial sites across Europe, confirmed by ancient DNA analysis as recently as 2019. The plague is not metaphor. It is not allegory. It is a bacterium that scientists have extracted from a tooth root in a 6th century grave in Bavaria and sequenced in a laboratory. It happened. All of it. And the world you live in is built in ways you cannot fully see on the silence it left behind. Before you go, I genuinely want to know, did this change how you think about the fall of Rome, or about how invisible forces shape history? If you have 3 minutes, leave a comment.
Tell me what landed, what surprised you, or what you think I got wrong. Every single comment helps shape what Ancient Wrath makes next, and I read every one of them. Procopius never finished his history of the plague. He moved on to other subjects, maybe because there was simply nothing left to say, or maybe because to keep writing it was to keep living inside it. Some silences are not forgetting. Some silences are the only honest response to a scale of loss that language was never built to hold.